let the Falcons do. Rise up. Welcome to Rise Up Reactions, the show where we talk all things Falcons, NFL, Georgia sports, and in general the sports news of the day. I'm your host, Dr. Lee Denning, fantasy sports enthusiast. So in continuing with the fantasy sports trend that I've been doing for the last few videos as we are approaching the fantasy draft season, just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk a little bit about everybody's favorite topic, running backs. Typically, running backs are highly valued and highly coveted in the fantasy world, and a lot of us who play on a regular basis know that's because it's the biggest position scarcity next to tight ends. You've got about 10 to 16 guys kind of at the top who can potentially do really well every year, and then everybody else is just kind of a toss-up as to what's going to happen. Backups are much more valuable in this position than they are in any other position on the field, so you do have to be mindful of not just the guy who's going to be getting the rock most of the time, but you've got to be mindful of his backup as well. Take last year with Tony Pollard and Zeke Elliott. Tony Pollard had a great year and finished in the top 30 for running backs, but Zeke still finished as the number 7 overall running back. But still, again, Tony Pollard finished better. That means we got 32 starting running backs. Tony Pollard finished better than at least 3 starting running backs. And really, you can say he finished better than 4 because A.J. Dillon was also one of the guys who finished in the top 25 last year. And again, a backup running back who supplanted a starter just by fantasy production, and honestly by a large margin for some of these guys. I am going to kind of break it down a little bit. I do have 32 guys that I want to talk about, and I probably can expand that out. What I'm actually going to do today, I'm going to go through the first 17, which is kind of my first 3 tiers off the board, and then I'll come back and hit a couple other tiers in a later video. But just to kind of keep it simple and so I can actually talk with some clarity about these guys and not feel rushed. So, we'll talk about their average draft position as well, so you kind of know where you're going to have to draft these guys if you want them. So your first 3 tiers, you have your elite, your great, and then your still very good options here. So, Jonathan Taylor, number 1 overall, almost universally taken number 1 overall. He had a great year last year. He has the most upside, phenomenal offensive line. He's going to catch the ball from Matt Ryan. He has an upgrade because of Matt Ryan at quarterback, so he's going to have pressure taken off of him as well. He finished with 373 fantasy points in a PPR last year, which was number 1 by more than 30 points. So, again, he basically had a full game's worth better than the next guy, which the next guy was Austin Eckler. He finished with 243. But he is not my number 2, even though he's being taken kind of like the number 2, number 3 guy. My number 2 is still Derrick Henry. If Derrick Henry comes back and is anything like he's been the last few years, he's going to be a beast. Last year, he only played basically 7 1/4 games. If you were to take his fantasy production, which he had at that point, he had ended up with 193 fantasy points. If you had just pushed that out for 17 games, he would have had 450 points, which again, we just talked about Jonathan Taylor, 373 playing a full season. Derrick Henry would have been basically 3 fantasy weeks better than him if he had played an entire season healthy. So we don't know what's going to happen with Henry. This may be the injury that kind of causes him to back off a little bit. But we'll see. I still like Derrick Henry, and until he proves otherwise, I still think he is very much worth a flyer. It's really the only time he's missed since he's been in the league. So that's why I would take him over pretty much everybody else. The guy that's actually going at the 102 mark overall, we'll talk about in a minute. That's Christian McCaffrey. But just to kind of break it down again, we're Jonathan Taylor, number 1, going 101 overall. Derrick Henry, he's actually going in the middle of the first. So if you're picking like 5, 6, 7, there's no reason to avoid him. You will absolutely get the second or first best player in the draft if you take him there. So I love Derrick Henry this year. Austin Eckler, I do have at number 3. He's going at pick 106. Again, he's going to be a heavy pass-catching back. He doesn't really do a lot on the ground, though he is their goal line back for right now. They did add Isaiah Spiller. He was a 4th-round draft pick for him this year for the Chargers. He's probably going to eat into a little bit of the goal line work, but we'll see what happens overall. I still like Austin Eckler. He's had 2 great fantasy production years. He actually helped me make it to a championship 2 years ago, and he just continued that production onward. So I do like him to continue being productive in a very good offense overall. Number 4, I have Dalvin Cook. I feel a little strange about this one. He regressed last year, but if he goes back to what he did the 3 years prior, he will be easily a top 5 running back. They do have a new offensive scheme, and they have a new coach. Don't know how that's going to play out, but we'll see. We'll know very quickly if he's going to be the guy he was, or if it's time to kind of move on and put him out to the fantasy pasture, or start considering him an RB2. Still has a very high upside. He's going at the back end of round 1 at 109 overall. So a guy that I do think is going to be better this year. He also regressed tremendously in touchdowns last year, went from 16 to 6. That shouldn't happen again. He should have at least 9+ touchdowns this year. I do look for the Minnesota Vikings to be very competitive, though I'm not sure if they'll make the playoffs. They're probably going to have a lot of one-score games where they're going to have to be throwing and running the ball and just basically still doing a lot of good clock management. So he's in a good position overall. So that kind of rounds out most of the guys. I do think that Christian McCaffrey, I have him at 5. He is going at pick 102 overall because of his upside. Upside is great. Big problem. He has played 10 out of 33 games in the last 2 years. He has been hurt, and he has been a healthy scratch at times. I do not like him where he's being taken. If you want to take a flyer on him at the back end of round 1, I think that's perfectly fine. But I'm personally avoiding him if I'm in a position to draft him. I would rather take Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, even Tyreek Hill, or any of the other wide receivers. I would rather have them over him because I just can't count on him. If he stays healthy, I'll be completely wrong. He's going to finish as a top 3 back. It's almost inevitable if he can stay healthy. But I just don't like him for the health issues. I don't know why everybody loves him so much. But again, if you're going for like a home run swing, he is the home run swing of home run swings this year. So you should absolutely go for him if that's your goal. But if you're looking for a little bit of safety, which I think you should be looking for high upside, high safety in the first 4 rounds, he ain't it. Second round, great pick. First round, I don't like that he's going second pick overall. That just doesn't make sense to me. Moving on, we're going to go through the next guys. 6 through 13, I kind of have all in the same tier. One of them is going to be a surprise for a lot of people, but it's because of how well he did last year and because of what I think is going to happen this year. Joe Mixon, he almost got into my top 5 guys this year. I do think his upside is not quite as high as McCaffrey if McCaffrey's healthy, but he is a much safer pick than McCaffrey, which is why I kind of have him as a borderline elite option here. He was the number 4 running back last year with a pretty piss-poor offensive line, as evidenced by the amount of times Joe Burrow got sacked. He still found a way to be RB4 overall. He was involved in the passing game. I just like him this year. I think that they are going to do really well overall. He's going pick 202 overall, so first part of the second round. You can probably, if you really like him, you can take him in the first round. Number 7 is Najee Harris. My big thing with him, he is the only running back worth having in Pittsburgh. They fed him tremendously last year, and he ended up finishing really well last year. So I do like him in the passing game. I like him in the running game, and I think he has a lot of high upside overall. But again, we're going into a situation where we've never been before for the last basically 20 years. Big Ben's gone, and we don't know what the Pittsburgh offense is going to be. I think they're going to be fine overall, but I just don't know that they're going to be the best team in the world. I think they're going to be throwing a lot, but again, they don't have the best quarterbacks in the world there, so they may be throwing a lot of screen passes or a lot of kind of little just short routes, dump-off passes to the running back, and that's where Najee is going to be really good. I think he surprised a lot of people with his hands with the receiving last year. But moving on. Then we have Aaron Jones, Green Bay Packers. There's a significant lack of wide receiver help in Green Bay. He is heavily involved in the passing game already, so that's going to do nothing but improve his stock. The one big negative for him is A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon proved last year that he can be a running back 1, especially when Jones was not healthy last year. He just came in and basically took over that production and then really maintained that. So they went to a true 50-50 committee last year, and they both were still very productive with Aaron Rodgers. I think they're going to be both the stalwarts of that that offense, and they're going to be the workhorses. So I think both of them have high upside, with Jones being a little bit higher overall. So that's my thoughts on him. Number 9, Nick Chubb. He is going at pick 301 overall. So beginning of the 3rd round, a guy who went in the 1st round in years past. He basically finished with over 1,000 yards 3 years in a row. He is incredibly consistent, and they are going to need him this year. They're going to need to lean on him and Kareem Hunt, who Kareem Hunt was not very good last year. But I think Nick Chubb is due for a pretty good year overall. I don't know why everybody's staying away from him. If Deshaun Watson doesn't get the lengthy suspension, he's going to be phenomenal. So if you're getting him at the beginning of the third round, you should consider it an absolute steal. So basically, the guy who gets Jonathan Taylor could also end up getting him there. And I love that pick. I love him in the third round. I would love him anywhere in the second round. So I think you would do fine overall there. The next guy, DeAndre Swift, not great on the ground, but he is very good in the passing game. He's basically had more than 60 receptions the last few years in a row, and I do love his upside for that reason in the passing game, especially in PPR. And I should be very clear, most of my rankings are done for a PPR format. I don't particularly care for standard. Half-point PPR is what Underdog and a couple of the other daily fantasy leagues use. But most people tend to use PPR as their standard, as their preferred format for just redraft leagues and dynasties. So I kind of stick with that. But I do like DeAndre Swift overall. But my big problem, he has had less than 700 yards in 2 years as a running back. Don't love that. Would like to see him more involved in the ground game, but we'll see. He should have a little bit better help this year in Detroit with some new wide receiving options to help take pressure off of him. So I think he'll be good in that regard. Number 11, Leonard Fournette. He had 84 targets last year. There's no Ronald Jones. So, again, a guy who's close to 1,000 yards every year on the ground, and he's getting, somewhere around 60 receptions off of a high number of targets every year from Tom Brady, who is getting older and is going to have to dump the ball off more because his arm is not going to hold up forever. Eventually, he's going to pull a Drew Brees and a Big Ben, and he is going to lose a step. I don't know if it's this year, but he, at any point in time, I think that could happen to Brady, and none of us would be super surprised by it. I do think Brady is still very good, though. My big problem with Leonard Fournette is that they did draft Rachaad White in the third round, which means that he's going to be on that team for at least 3 to 4 years, and they basically spend a decent amount of capital on him. So I think he's going to eat into some of Leonard Fournette's time, but he's really more of a replacement for Ronald Jones, who also did the same thing last year a little bit to Fournette. Fournette has high upside, though, so definitely a guy that you could get away with as an RB1. A guy that's kind of questionable at RB1 because Melvin Gordon is still there, Javonte Williams. That's my only knock on him. He almost had 200 points as a running back by committee last year, which was great. So especially down the stretch, they started leaning on him more, and he started showing why they drafted him. I believe he was taken in the second round last year. So he started showing why he was one of the highest running backs taken last year. So love him there. And again, these guys are going Joe Mixon 202, Najee Harris 110, Aaron Jones 205, Nick Chubb 301, DeAndre Swift 203, Leonard Fournette 209, and Javonte Williams 212. Now, the guy that I think is still in this tier, but is going to be questionable, and you can definitely get him a lot later, going at 809, Damian Harris. He was the RB14 in 2021. He is the best option that they have in New England, and he has secure hands. They leaned heavily on him. They don't really have an offensive coordinator this year. They may change up their scheme a little bit. He's still their best option. Ramondre Stevenson, a lot of guys think he's going to take a step forward. I'm not one of them. I still think Damian Harris is going to be the guy next year. This is kind of my big home run swing for myself this year. I'm kind of leaning on him in a dynasty. And I just really feel like he's going to do well overall. So again, the only big downside to me is it's the damn Patriots. Nobody knows what they're going to do on a year-to-year basis. Last year was the first year in recent memory that they have just committed to one guy, giving him the rock and letting him, be the primary back. And he truly was that for most of the season and finished as the number 14 overall. So again, I like him this year to continue that trend. I don't know if I like him for the years after, as he is getting a little bit older and he's in a weird offense overall, but I do like him. Now, your final tier for this one. A lot of guys are going to be like, why haven't I mentioned Saquon Barkley yet? A guy who's going pick 206 overall. It's because Saquon's hurt. He has the biggest upside in the world. He could be a top 5 back and will win you a league if you hit on him. I think the chance that you hit on him is about 25%, and the chance that you miss is about 75%. He's not been the same guy that he was in the first couple of years. Really, that first year when he stepped onto the scene, he was amazing. But he's been a draft bust for pretty much every year after that. I don't like the offense in the New Jersey Giants very well at all. I think they're going to be better this year, but there's a lot of unknowns. Daniel Jones is not my preferred quarterback. He's not even in my top 25. I just don't like his situation. And again, if he is good, if he can get over the injury bug, if he plays all 16 games and he does anything like he did his first year, he's a home run. You did incredibly well if you got him in the 3rd or 4th round, but he's going in the middle of the 2nd, so you're going to have to take a risk if you want him there. I'm not willing to take that risk. And then moving on, we've got James Conner at number 15 overall. I think he has a huge ceiling. My problem with him is he has had half of a good year in Arizona. He won a lot of people leagues last year. But I don't know if he can continue that. Kyler Murray is going to lean on him a little bit more. They did just get a deal done with the Kyler for the next 5 years, so he's going to be around for a while. James Conner is also just a little bit older at running back. He's been in the league about 6 years now, and so he's starting to have some wearing out that tread on his tires here. But he had really good production in Pittsburgh under Big Ben, and then I think he's going to be fine this year. I think he has a lot of upside. I don't know if he's an RB1 for most people. I think he has the potential to be, but he's probably the top end of the RB2 market here. So I do like him, kind of where he's going at 309 overall. A guy, number 16. I don't understand this. I truly don't, because all he has done is prove his haters wrong. He doesn't necessarily look good doing it, but Zeke Elliott is going at the middle of the 4th round right now. Zeke is my 16 just because of where he's being drafted, but I think Zeke could be a top 10 running back again. My biggest knock on him, he's a little older. He is in the middle of his 2nd contract right now. My biggest thing is every single year that he's been in the league, he's had more than 975 rushing yards. Every single year. He hasn't fallen off. He had more than 1,000 yards last year. He had, I think, 10 touchdowns on the ground last year. He finished as the RB7, and he's being drafted like he's been put out to pasture because everybody has that recency bias of what Tony Pollard did, eating into his overall production. But again, he's still a great back, and he's still going to be fine this year. At some point, he will fall off a cliff. I don't think it's this year. I think it's probably 2 or 3 years from now. But I would still take Zeke with confidence in the 4th round. If you can get him at 404 overall, I think you take him as your RB2. Maybe if you've gone no running back and he's the guy there, you just take him and be super happy with what you've got. He's still going to put up RB1 numbers, and you could have 3 elite wide receivers. So definitely a target for guys who are going 0 running back this year. I don't know why he's got so much hate. I love him overall. And then my final guy, Alvin Kamara. I don't need to say a lot here. He's got a 6-game suspension. Otherwise, he'd be top 8. That's the only big knock on him. He's going to miss half of the regular fantasy season. If you are drafting him and counting on him, you are sorely mistaken. You are making a huge mistake if you think that you're going to win your league with him as your primary guy. You're going to need to draft Mark Ingram if you do that, because he's clearly the backup right now, and you're going to have to hope that his suspension is not 6 games. You're going to have to hope that maybe the league gives him like a 4-game suspension. Those 6 seems to be the going rate right now. But anyways, that's what I think about the guys right now. I would definitely move Alvin Kamara up into that great range if he didn't have the suspension, maybe even the elite range. But that's just what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like this video, I'd love you to hit the like button. Consider subscribing. It'll really help us out. And until next time, rise up.